Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first panel of Comic Art Live Fall 2022. And I've got a super special guest that, usually we start these panels after 1 o'clock, but Jim was available early today. And so I've got Jim Shooter with me today. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Nice to be here.
No, it's my pleasure. I mean, I've been a fan of you. I've seen you at a few shows, a few panels you've been on. We got to have dinner earlier in the summer. And so it was kind of you were on my wish list for this show to be on here. So I'm glad that you get to kind of kick things off for us and be our first panel of the day.
Oh, it's great. That's great.
So I want to get us started on the artwork behind you. I mean, when we were there, you told me a story about Jack Kirby and a convention appearance and a auction that was going on, and I believe that the artwork that's on the wall is the one related to that story. I mean. As I tell everybody, when I was collecting comics in the 70s, I didn't get Jack Kirby. He didn't click for me. I was too interested in John Buscema, John Byrne when he rolled around, and I'd be looking at Kirby, and I always wondered, like, why are they letting this guy still draw comics, right? And but today, and not today, many years after that, I realized Kirby is the king. He deserves all the praise that he got, And so, if you could, tell us that story about the artwork that's on the wall behind you. I'd love to kind of start the show off with that.
Well, a little backstory. Back in the late 50s and throughout the 60s, I worked at DC in the mid to late 60s, and Jack was considered a third string artist. I mean, DC didn't want him. They gave him a few little jobs here and there, but he was not up to their standard. But so when Stan started Marvel Comics, and it was kind of a Hail Mary because his Martin Goodman, who owned it, Marvel was going to close it. Well, Stan had these third string artists, Steve Ditko, Jack Kirby, and boy, he gave them a stage to play on, and they knocked it out of the park. The stories were so good, that they cooked up with Stan, and they told them so well that pretty soon he became a first string artist.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in meetings at DC where they're looking at the books like you did and saying, what's up with this? Who likes this? Why? And I could have told them. I was a kid, so I kept my mouth shut. But when I was 15, 16, and I could have told them, this guy tells a story like you're there, you're seeing it. And it doesn't matter if his style is stylized. Who cares? But anyway, all right. So then he actually worked for DC for a while, as everybody knows, and that didn't work out too well. I mean, that was sort of after the glory years at Marvel, and even though Jack was just a machine gun of ideas and stuff, it just didn't work as well as what he did with Stan, and it didn't sell. So they cut him loose, and in 1975 he came back to Marvel. Marvel said to have him. He had a 3 years contract, started in the middle of 75. And I'm telling you, the books just did not sell, because at that point it was like a lot of people looked at him, looked old fashioned, looked like it might be a reprint. They didn't get it. And so Kirby's books, it was all newsstand in those days, and the average Marvel book might sell, have a sell-through of about 50%, which is good on the newsstand. And the Jacks were selling like 12%, 8%, and there was no direct market yet. Anyway, so he was kind of at a nadir of his career. I became editor-in-chief in 1978, and Jack's contract expired in the middle of 78. And so I guess right around the time his contract expired, I was at San Diego, and at the San Diego Con, Jack usually came there. And they used to have artists stand on a stage. They'd have like 6 at a time. And they would draw a big drawing they had easels with these giant artboards on them. And then the convention would auction them off to raise money. And like I said, Jack is at the nadir of his popularity. So this fellow before him, the Jack Katz, did something, I think it was called New Kingdoms, a self-published thing.
Mm-hmm.
But Jack Katz, you could set a minimum bid. So Jack Katz set the minimum bid for his picture at $200. Now in those days, that was a lot. These things are usually going for 30 or 50 or, and so he wanted 200. Well, it was silence for a moment. And then I think one of his relatives, volunteered to buy it. So then the next one up is Jack's, and this auctioneer. I'm sorry, I don't think much of the guy. He holds up that picture and he says, "Anybody give me $5 for this?"
Oh my gosh!
Jack walks out of the room. He just walks away, and I was editor-in-chief, but I wasn't making a fortune then. I was by no means rich, but I had a credit card, so. I thought there's no way that Jack's picture, Kirby's picture, goes for less than Jack Cat. So I bid 200, which was tied.
Mm-hmm.
And then some murmur goes to the crowd. Hey, the editor-in-chief of Marvel thinks that's worth something,
Mm-hmm.
And so people start to bid. And this fool auctioneer shuts them down. No, Jim wants it. It's Jim's. Jim wants it. I'm like, let them bid. I'll beat any bid. I've got a credit card.
Right.
Anyway, so I took the picture and I go out in the hall. I'm walking down the hall and there's Jack. And so I gave it to him. I said, "Jack, I rescued this from the Philistines. It's going to be worth a lot of money, So, yeah, he thanked me and then he kind of walks away and then he turns around and comes back and says, "No, I want you to have this." Okay. And I have it. There it is.
I mean, that's just crazy. Sounds like the guy was trying to be a comedian rather than an auctioneer.
No, I mean, he
the art
just
with
had no respect for Jack whatsoever. His disdain was palpable. It was just like, anybody give me $5? I mean, he meant that. He meant that. I was there. It was sincere. I couldn't believe it, and then a PS. Now I don't know what this is worth, but I've had art dealers say, "Do you know what that's worth? How much do you want?" It's priceless to me.
Right. I mean, what is it? It's like 2 foot by 3 foot, or maybe even a little bit larger. I guess it's
bigger than that. I mean, the frame is bigger than that, certainly.
Wow.
It's a giant piece of artboard. They all drew them on those size things.
Right. I remember seeing pictures from back in the day when photographs from the show when they had the artists doing the work. So yeah, they were pretty huge.
Yeah, and then and then people did some really great stuff. They wanted me to do one once. And I said, "I'm not going to stand in front of all these people and prove that I can't draw." And so they don't know. It's just your name. So I said, "All right, I get to pick my inker. How's that?" And they said, "Sure." So I talked to Steve Lealoha and I said, "Steve, I'm going to draw a really crummy picture of Spider-Man. Do you think you can fix it?" He said, "Sure, that'll be fun." So we did. I drew a picture of Spider-Man and Steve inked it and looked great. Steve's
a master. I love him. His inking is just fantastic. He made a lot of people look great just because of his distinctive inking style.
Yeah. So anyway, the auctioneer got the highest amount of money that they'd gotten that day, whatever it was. So I felt pretty good about that, and then of course, John Byrne is one of the people on the stage with me. And when he sees how much my picture goes for, he's not going to let that stand. And so he does this amazing, brilliant, beautiful thing. It was Fantastic Four, I think. That was so he could get, the higher price. And he did. And he deserved it. I mean, by a long shot. But that was pretty funny. So people were going crazy then. That was a good time.
Yeah, it's too bad that those things probably aren't recorded anywhere where they could see the interactions between you guys on stage. So I'm sure there was a bit of gamesmanship on that. Like you say, John was not going to let that slide.
Some of the guys, got into it, but not much. It was all friendly.
There was a comment from Steve Scott. He said, "Jim, you were in charge of most of my favorite comic books of their childhood, and I went on to a long career after this inspiration." So thanks for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So when you obviously you were you kind of got into the business as an artist, and how did that evolve into being an editor? I mean, did you want to be editor? I mean, was that like your goal in the medium in that business to become an editor-in-chief?
My goal was just to make some money for my family. That was it. I mean, like, I loved comics, but I was going to grow up and be a scientist, and so I figured somebody got paid for doing these comics. So I tried to figure it out. I tried to figure out what to do, and I thought I knew I couldn't draw well enough to compete with what was printed in the books. Um, but I thought maybe I could write well enough. I had an idea that because I had all these ideas and all these things I wanted to do, and so I picked the Legion of Superheroes because I thought that was the book of all the books that had the most potential, and it was the least realized. And So I created stuff for them, and I didn't know what a script looked like. So I actually drew the panels the best I could, lettered them all in, made a cover design, colored it because I wanted them to know exactly what I wanted, And I thought I was ready, and I sent it in. And long story short, they started using me. A little bit surprised when they found out how old I was, because at that time I had just turned 14. I started when I wrote the first 3 when I was 13. But now I was 400 miles away, so it's all on the phone. Nobody, the editor thought I was a college kid, and so anyway, I was really trying to get a writing gig, and that was my best trick. They liked my cover designs. Neil Adams used to draw. His first job at DC Comics was drawing covers from my designs, and he liked my designs. And of course, he'd make them better. He'd knock it out of the park, but he liked my designs, and he thought I had a good sense of it. And I think that's probably how I got over at writing at age 13, is because I had some visual sense to go with it. I mean, I'm sure I wasn't quite Shakespeare then, but I think the combination of some visual sense and good design sense, and then on top of that, the writing made the cut. So, but I was a writer. I was trying to make a living. Well, then after I graduated from high school, I already had a job, and I wasn't as interested in the science stuff anymore, and I liked what I was doing, and so I continued to write mostly, and then I was offered an editorial position at Marvel. I was working at DC at the time, and I thought, no, I'm gonna try that, and I did, and it was tough, but it gave me some great opportunities, and got some good people together, and we got stuff done.
No, well, it's funny, you see a lot of artist interviews over, in many publications, and I think there's a contingency of artists that love you, and then there's probably other creators that are like, Jim was rough on me. I mean, I think that's probably kind of something that everybody has to go through, right? When you're managing all these editorial groups.
I met Bill Bevins, who was CEO of a holding company, Perlman's holding company that owned Marvel. And we were talking about it. He actually was interested in having me come in as the president of the company. And I said, well, some people there don't like me. And he said, that means you did your job.
Exactly.
It's not keeping television. Trust me, that means you did your job. And I did. I mean, as far as if you track these guys down who say that they don't like me or talk bad about me or something like that, try to find out what the crime was. What did he do to you? Okay. And if the truth comes out, it will be that I said no, or I did my job. I said, I was the editor in chief, I was the boss. I was supposed to protect these franchises and try to make them succeed. And if I didn't think the guy was doing, I gave everybody a lot of room. I would rather have the editors and the writers figure it out. I'll prove it. I'll look at it, make sure we're not straying off the path here. But I tried to just, stay out of their way. There was no house style. There's nothing like that. I mean, I didn't dictate anything. I didn't tell anybody write like me. I just, and so we had this great variety. I mean, Larry Hama's books are nothing like Louise Simonson's, and Chris's writing was nothing like Roger Stern's, and so forth. And I, as long as they were doing sensible stuff, I had no problem. And they often amazed me. They did things that I would never think of, and that was great. But if one guy wanted to have Spider-Man father an illegitimate child, I said, no, you're not doing that. And why not? You're stifling my creativity. And I said, I'll stifle it forever if that's what you come up with. I said, he wouldn't do that, number one, because the key to Spider-Man is responsibility. He screwed up once. he's not going to make life-changing mistakes for somebody again.
Right.
And I said, it's out of character, one. Two, we have signed licenses with people all over the world that has a clause in there and says we won't do stuff like that. Three, it has a code seal on it, and it goes on a spinner rack. It says, hey kids, comics, wholesome entertainment. And, some parents might find that objectionable. We do it in Epic Comics. That's fine. Do it in the adult line.
Right.
But you can't do it in Amazing. It's not proper. So he loses his mind, and he goes out and he does a interview with a fanzine talking about how I deny him his creative freedom and all that stuff. Scathing interview. Well, the interview comes out. All the fanzines came to the office. Everybody saw them. And so then this guy gets cold feet. He's reading what he said, and he's like, oh, no. So he comes in begging for his job. And I said, Bill, you never lost your job. Just don't do that again, okay?
Yeah. That's well, that's like you said, it's par for the course. If you weren't doing your job, you were the gatekeeper. You had to make sure that the stories and the consistency that really was Marvel. I mean, the continuity from things had to stay true to it. I mean, it's
yeah, exactly. And the thing is that two things. Number one, we were on the edge of death. Okay, mm-hmm. So if we were going to go down, with me being responsible. I mean, I thought, I'm not going to let you go try experiments. We need this to be right, and we need it right now. Yeah. And so we did. We got the great people, Archie Goodwin and everything. Like I said, if they knew what they're doing, I stayed out of their way. And they turned it around. They turned it around. That's one thing. The other thing is that if you go through everybody who has a problem with me, I didn't have any problem with anybody who was doing their job, and anybody who was doing their job never had a problem with me. But if you give me a name, and I'll say, this is the part of the problem that they were. This is how I tried to fix it peacefully, and this is what happened. He didn't go along with it, or he did, or he quit, or what. Roy Thomas got mad at me, quit for a while. Sometimes it could be just a legitimate disagreement. Just I see it this way, he sees it that way, and that was the case with Roy. Roy wasn't doing anything crazy, but we differed on certain things. And so he got mad at me and quit for a while. Guess what? He came back. You always hear about him quitting. You never hear about when he came back. And he wrote me a nice letter saying how agreeable it was to be back at Marvel. Okay. Nobody mentioned Steve Englehart coming back, or Jim Starlin, or Bernie mm-hmm. Wrightson, or all the guys who came back when I was there.
Right.
Whatever. I don't care.
Well, I mean, but that says a lot too. They came back because, well, the thing is, they probably left in the first place because they were passionate about the characters and the stories and the history, and they knew they still wanted to be a part of it, even when maybe you guys weren't always on the same page.
Well, it wasn't even me. I mean, Englehart left when Jerry Conway was editor-in-chief. Starlin also when Jerry Conway was editor-in-chief. But they left Marvel, and then when I was there, they came back. And yeah, I mean, I'll tell you what, though, I never had a problem with the guys who had passion. Never. It wasn't me denying them their passion. I always use this example. If you're walking down the hall and you see two adult people arguing at the top of their lungs about who's stronger, Spider-Man or Colossus, your first instinct is grow up. And then you say, no, don't grow up.
Exactly. No, I'm totally with you on that.
Care that much. Mm-hmm. Care that much. And so the guys who were just passionate about it, Claremont, his style wasn't anything like what I would do, and sometimes I thought he went off the rails, but boy, he cared. I mean, he tried so hard. He worked harder than anybody. He in 17 years that I know of, he never missed an issue. He went down to the wire a few times, but he never missed an issue. Got it in. Come dragging in on a Monday morning, having slept 3 hours all weekend, but he had it done, and it was good.
Yeah, he's one of the people I was curious about. Was one of the names I was going to mention to you because he was so prolific during your time there. It seemed like, I don't know how he was able to put out as much work as he did, at such a level that we look back on so many of his stories, whether it's in X-Men or Marvel Team Up or wherever, that are some of my favorite stories of all time to this day. I think of the work that he did. I just can't imagine how he was able to do it.
Well, the two best things that ever happened to Chris Claremont were Louise Simonson and Ann Nocenti, and because they were brilliant, they kept Chris from going too crazy sometimes, because sometimes you get carried away.
Mm-hmm.
And they not saying they wrote it for him, but I'm sure they discussed things and inspired him and helped him. Even before Louise with the Phoenix saga, I think his editor was Jim Salicrup at that point, and we went out to lunch, and Chris was stuck for an idea. I don't care who you are, you get a little dry spell once in a while. And so the way that whole Phoenix thing started was he didn't have any ideas, and we weren't saying anything that was helping him. And finally I said, Chris, at Marvel, we've had a lot of bad guys become good guys. The Black Widow, Hawkeye, Swordsman. I said, well, we never had a good guy go bad and stay that way. And he says, don't say another word. He says, I got this. I got it. I wanted to do it all myself. All right, because that was how he was. He didn't want to do it for him. And so that's how it started. Now everybody knows the ending, where they tried to cop out at the end, and I wouldn't let him. And he said, I'm going to kill her. And I said, deal. Okay, it's a good ending if you do it right. He was bluffing, but that's what we ended up doing. And it worked well. It took out X-Men from middle of the road to #1 in the business, where it stayed for 20 years.
Very true. I mean, I think the first, X-Men was my main title. Thor was my second, but I started reading X-Men around and buying off the spinner rack for around 126. Yeah. And when you hit the death of Phoenix and, the few in the issues after that, I was hooked for life.
Those Byrne issues they were tremendous. They really were. And then Chris always got good artists. He had John Romita Jr. He had Mark Silvestri. And he would go out and bird dog him. He didn't wait for the editor. The editor had to approve it, of course. Yeah. But Chris, if he knew that John Romita Jr. was going to leave, artists come and go at this natural occurrence. Chris would start looking early, trying to find somebody really good to replace him. He never wanted to be, stuck with like a lesser artist, I guess. And so he would actively go out and hunt people down. Well, I introduced him to Mark Silvestri. Mark Silvestri showed me samples at the Chicago Con. Mm-hmm. I said, boy, these are good. Wow. And so Chris was looking for an artist at that point. And so I ran into Chris down the hall, and I said, hey, Chris, you should go look at this guy's stuff, So he runs over. He comes running back to me. I want him. Can we have him on X-Men? And I said, well, if it's okay with, I don't know, it was Louise or Ann, whoever it was, maybe it was Ann. I said, fine. I said, I already took the guy's information. I intended for us to use him someplace. I think he's great. And so he did it for a while. I don't remember how long.
No, I like Silvestri's run on it. That was right around the time when I was just stopping buying comics at the time. I was going to college then, but no, that's interesting though, that you don't really think of the writer going after, an artist, at least at that point in time, but he was concerned. He wanted the image to match the.
That was the editor's job usually, to track down people for the writer, and they all did it pretty well, I think. But Chris was active. He wanted to keep Warzakowski on the book doing the lettering, and Glynis Oliver doing the coloring, because, like I say, artists will come and go, but he wanted the book to be as consistent as possible. And so he figured if he had the same letterer all the time, and the same colorist all the time, and they were both brilliant, by the way, that would help the book to have this consistent look and feel, no matter who drew it. And so there was the royalty program, but letterers and colorists didn't get royalties. It was a writer, the penciler, and the anchor. And then there was the editor got a little override, and there were other little things, like if you created a book, you got this continuing royalty for creating the book. If you well, I don't know, there were some other little tiny royalties, but so I tried to talk to the artists and writers and say, hey, maybe we should include at least the colorists,
Mhm.
because I'm going to have a hard time winning the fight upstairs. That it makes a difference who letters the book, but at least the colorist. And they didn't want to. They didn't want to give. I said I can't get any more money. I said, but I can. We could divide it differently. Each guy could give up a 32nd of a point, or something like that, just so they get a
Yeah.
royalty, which on the X-Men would have been a lot of money. But they didn't want to do any. They didn't want to lose any money. All right, fine. So Chris paid Glynis and Tom a royalty out of his own pocket. He gave them part of his royalty just to keep them on the book. And you notice they did. They stayed there. So,
Sure.
I mean, his people give him a lot of credit. They don't give him enough. He did a fantastic amount of work, and it was like you say, it was sincere and tried hard. And all that work, but there are things that I thought were not so good. Yeah, a few. I mean, it's just hard to write thousands of stories, and everything one is brilliant and perfect. But for the most part, he batted a high average. I compared him to Babe Ruth. He didn't create the X-Men, but he built the house.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, Orzechowski's always been one of my favorite letterers, and maybe for that reason. But it was, I think about it, it did make things seamless, right? From going from Byrne to Cockrum to Paul Smith, you had this consistency in the and the lettering. It was just beautiful. And you're right that I didn't think about the colors though. I mean, I think I'd have to go back and look at the coloring, but I always knew the lettering, was consistent, and I just always thought that. His work was just amazing. He did such a fantastic job.
Yeah, and Chris would challenge him all the time. I want special alien balloons, and I want this, and I want that. You give me a different typeface for this. And Orzechowski, I don't know if you know him. I mean, he's a great guy. He's a nut. I mean, he loved that. It was great. I mean, anyone else would say, "Oh, now I got to do this," but not Tom. He's such an artist. He is such an amazing artist. That he's drawing the lettering.
Well, that's what it felt like. I mean, and I can see why Chris would want to keep him on for that. I mean, but again, it's back to he's assembling this great team. He's making sure it wasn't the editor. While the editor had a responsibility to it, Chris was really in charge. I mean, it was
very proactive. And like I said, the best things that ever happened to him were Louise and Ann, who said yes most of the time. And it's funny, when I said no, people get mad at me. With Louise says no, you say yes, ma'am, and you do what she says. I don't know. But
yeah, well, so you always had to be the bad guy. Louise got the
well, nobody ever wanted to disappoint Louise. Louise was so nice, and she was so good at what she did, and such a brilliant lady. You just kind of didn't want to let her down. And if she told you it was wrong, you believed her. But it's much easier to fight with the big hulking guy. It's like Chris fought with me all the time. I used to think he didn't like me, and I ran into him after I left Marvel, and this was shortly after they dumped him off the X-Men. Idiots.
Mm-hmm.
And comes running over, shakes my hand. How you doing? And I'm like, I thought you didn't like me. He said, no, we used to fight all the time. He said, but we fought about stories. Isn't that what an editor and a writer should fight about? I said, good point. So, and he actually came and worked for me at Defiant briefly. And he, I mean, we still do the bandering. Every time I see him, we do the bandering, we get along really well. We have a lot of history to share.
You did work a long time together. We've gotten a few other questions from the audience, but one that's, I guess, sort of related to things is why did Paul Smith ever leave the X-Men? Was he just on a short contract, or?
No, there was no contract. Paul, he did it for a while. He enjoyed it. He didn't like deadline pressure. He didn't like, I don't want to say working that hard, but I mean, he had many opportunities, many things he could do. So he did it for a while. He enjoyed it. And then he wanted to do something else. And I got along really well with Paul. I was the only guy he would let ride his motorcycle. He was the only guy he trusted. Also, I guess he knew I could pay for it if I broke it.
That's right. You had a credit card. Yeah, that's good. Let's see. Where was this other question I saw? Oh, it was from Sam Maroney. Wanted to know when you worked for Mort, did you ever meet other writers like Siegel, Ed Hamilton, Leo Dorfman?
I met Ed Hamilton, Leo Dorfman. I met Jerry Siegel years later when I was editor-in-chief of Marvel. He came to see me a couple times. We were talking about stuff he could do for us. And when DC got wind of Jerry Siegel might work for Marvel, they immediately scrambled around and made him an offer. I mean, he'd gone there first, and they didn't have it anymore. And then when he comes to see me, well, that's unacceptable. So they scrambled around. They got him working on something or other. I don't even actually know what he did, but he did end up working at DC.
Okay. That reminds me of a story you told me when we were at dinner as well. When, as far as somebody coming to you and asking you about work was that story about Steve Ditko. That was, do you mind, relaying that one? Because that was just such a great story. I mean, Steve, did so much for Marvel and Spider-Man, and he was such a creative genius. And again, another guy for me when I was young, like Kirby, I didn't get. But he's one of the artists I most admire today.
Yeah, you're younger than me. I was in the 60s. I bet you were 70s and 80s.
I was born in 68. So
yeah.
Yep.
If you had been around when I was, I think they would have meant more to you. But at any rate, no, Steve Ditko, I loved Steve's stuff when I was a kid. I just thought that was great. And everybody used to hang around at Neil Adams' studio often after work, just kind of a place to go and hang out. Neil had this immense studio, and a lot of people rented office space from him there. Mm-hmm. Jack Abel and Howard Chaykin shared a studio space there, and other people too. And so anyway, like I said, people would go there. So one day I was over there just with the guys, and I look over and I said, "That's Steve Ditko," and they said, "Yeah." I said, "Huh, gonna go talk to him." So I went and I introduced myself, and we were talking, just having a chat. And I said, Steve, I said, if you ever wanted to come back to Marvel, I said, I just want you to know that door's always open. And he said, no, I hate Marvel. I said, I don't blame you. I said, things are different now. I said, new sheriff. I said, there's royalties, there's benefits. You own 20% of any character you create forever. If you create a book, you get a 1% override forever, and your family and everything. And I told him, all the benefits. We provide all materials. We pay all your expenses. We pay your phone bill. We pay your shipping, everything. And I said, so, if you ever want, if you ever need work, or I said, if you ever need anything, call me, So, every time I'd see him once in a while. I didn't want to go through all this spieling. I'd say, door's always open, And so one day, receptionist calls me, or calls my secretary, and then she puts her through. And the receptionist says, this is some Steve Ditko guy here. Do you want to talk to him? I said, yes, I want to talk to Steve Ditko. So I went out to reception to get him. I mean, I didn't even want to send my secretary or something. I went out and got him, walked him back to my room. And so we sit down, and I did not mention work at all. We were just talking about, life and the weather and whatever, And so after a while, he says, "Oh, okay. Well, listen, I have to go now, and I'll see you again sometime." I said, "Great." So he leaves, and some of the guys says, "Hey, that was Ditko. Is he going to work for us?" And I said, "I didn't even ask him." I said, "He knows the door's open, so didn't ask him." Mm-hmm. So then I told the receptionist. I said, that this is who Steve Ditko is, and I explained who Steve Ditko was. I said he's a founding father. You treat him like royalty. And she was like, oh, all right. So anyway, next week he comes back. And she's, oh, Mr. Ditko, oh, welcome, come right in. And then she calls my secretary and that says Steve's on his way back. And then she calls every other editor in the place. She calls all the guys that work for me and says, Ditko's in the house. Click, Ditko's in the house. And so I'm sitting there chatting with Steve again about nothing. And all of a sudden, this crowd comes into my office. I have a pretty big office. All these people come in. They all want to meet Steve, shake his hand, and talk to him and show him stuff. And so he was like kind of holding court, and he was having a blast. Looked like he was having fun. So finally, he said, "All right, everybody, I got to go." And so he leaves. And so he said, "I'll see you. See you again." I said, "Fine." Third time he comes in, he sits down. He says, "If you have anything interesting, I'll consider it." And I said, "All right." So I got out in the hall and I found that we had a plot for a Captain America story. So we gave him that just to give him something that day.
Mm-hmm.
And then before you know it, he's doing a whole bunch of stuff for us. I mean, he didn't want to be grinding it out at that age. He wasn't, we kept him busy, but he wasn't really interested in like doing 2 books or something,
Right.
Yeah. So he did ROM, I think. Yes,
Yeah.
ROM. And then he did Captain Universe, a limited series. I think he did Machine Man. What else did he do? He did some other stuff. But we kept him busy all the time, as much as he wanted, but he didn't want too much. And it was great. And everybody wanted to ink Steve Ditko. Some of those ROMs that he did were inked by the who's who of inkers. Mm-hmm. They came out looking tremendous, seeing all these different guys and the way they would approach Ditko was really interesting. And so, and then he followed me to my next couple of companies. As soon as I left Marvel, they cut him loose. You don't cut loose a founding father, you idiots, but he turned up at Valiant and worked for me there. And then after I left Valiant, they cut him loose. And so he came to Defiant, did a little work for us there, not too much. He was getting other offers at that time. Mm-hmm. Mike Richardson, other people. And then he followed me to Broadway. And we were actually going to publish Mr. A. But Broadway got sold to Golden Books, and it just didn't happen. So.
Well, that's great. I mean, when everybody else was kind of forgetting about him, you were, but that's just crazy. It does seem like for all the, you think about Marvel and the continuity of the characters, but continuity of some of the creators wasn't the same.
A lot of people think, well, that Jack created so many things, and Steve, it's mostly just Spider-Man and Doctor Strange, but what they don't realize is that back then, and I don't know if it's still true today, but back then at least, Spider-Man alone brought more money into Marvel than everything Kirby ever did combined. It was Spider-Man was our one licensing success, and it did, like apples to apples, Kirby had more characters, but Spider-Man was what really was a success worldwide.
Sure. So with regards to the royalties, you helped establish that. How did you come up with percentages? Did you get an advisor to come in, or was this sort of all you just set it down and said, this is the percentages we're going to give everybody? How did you work that out?
When I took the job, the president hired me. I reported to the president, and we discussed it. I said, a lot of things have to change. And it was like, well, like what? And I said, well, for one thing, I had a list. I said, but for one thing, I want to start paying royalties. And the president, he wasn't interested in the comic book business at all. He was a book publisher. He came from book publishing. You know what he said? He said, "You mean we don't?" Said, I like working with this guy. This is going to be good. And so when I told him, a lot of things had to be changed. A lot of, I said, he said, well, all I want you to do is preside over the death of Marvel Comics because I'm getting us out of this stupid loser business. He said, I'm going to get us into animation and children's books. I said, you're so wrong. I said, this can be big. We can make it big. I says, we're going to be bigger than Disney. He said, baloney. He didn't say baloney, but that's what he meant. And I said, no. We're a long way from there. I said, but we can start. And so I made a deal with him that I could pay royalties. That day I made a deal with him, and that I could introduce these other programs. And in order to there was no money. I said, how about if I save money, or if I beat my projections, I can use that money. And he said he didn't think either of those things were possible. And so he said, sure, just try not to lose money. So I walked out of there with a pretty free hand, and so I did save money. I got us on time, saved hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in late fees and, express shipping and stuff. Got us saved a lot of money other ways too complicated to explain. But and I always beat my projections, always, every year by a long shot. And good, I got other great people. If you can't win with that team, fire the coach. So anyway, we were able to introduce all that stuff. Now, the royalty program, you think, well, it's already approved. What happened? Why did it take a while? The answer is two things. One, after Jack left, 6 months into my tenure there, after Kirby left, we started getting threatening letters from his lawyers. And our lawyers thought it was a real bad time to start paying royalties. And then that's one of the things that Kirby was angling for. It wasn't him, it was his lawyers and other people. But and the second thing was that DC, I don't know, they caught wind that we were going to do a royalty plan or what, but they announced one, and they sent out a memo. It's going to start on a certain date, blah, blah, blah. And it was real simple. It was the writer, the penciler, and the inker. They had a 4% to divide among them. I think the writer got 2%, and the penciler and inker got the other 2%. But I think the penciler got more than the inker. Like the inker got 3/4 of a point, and the penciler got 1 1/4. But the writer was getting a lot. So anyway, that comes out. And at that time, I pretty much convinced the board of directors that we have to start paying royalties. We can't fool around with this anymore. And I argued with the lawyers, and I finally convinced the lawyers it wasn't going to sink their ship. And but Barry Kaplan, my financial VP, he kept trying to complicate it up. And I'm like, Barry, come on. Okay, you wanted to make it. Well, what if it's based on increases of sales? I said, no. And he said, well, how is it fair that this, because whoever just happens to be on Spider-Man gets a big royalty bigger than the guy who does Ghost Rider? I said, Barry, that'll sort itself out. You trust me. That'll sort itself out. We just need to do it, and we need to do it fast. And then DC announces theirs, and I said, Barry, we have to do this now. And so we did it. I had to go back to the board of directors again, because DC, they announced a royalty plan. If their threshold was 100,000, they only had 3 titles that sold more than 100,000. And they didn't sell a lot more than 100,000. Their exposure for offering a royalty plan was very small, unless all the Marvel artists came over there, started working for them, and then their sales shot up, in which case they'd be happy to pay royalties. So their exposure is like $10,000, $20,000 a year. Our exposure from the sales at the moment that we did the analysis, that was that we would take $750,000 off the bottom line unless sales dramatically improved. So the president says, we need to talk to the board. Went over to the board. Stan came with me, and I pitched, and I convinced them, we must do this. This is not, some guys will go to DC. This is everybody will go to DC. And so they didn't even know what DC was. They didn't care. Nobody there ever opened a comic book. But Stan came with me, and he didn't say a lot. He just said, he's right. He's right. That's all I needed, though. I need a little support there.
Right.
And so I got it approved. They said, you will guarantee us that sales will go up. I said, I will guarantee you that. And they said, well, your job's on the line here. I said, I don't care. Well, guess what? It did go up. And it wasn't $750,000 of profit that was gone. It was $2 million. Okay. And it was the happiest $2 million they ever spent in their lives, because that meant the sales had shot up so high. Companies making money like crazy. So they didn't mind paying the royalty at all. And then we just kept doing it. But I mean, I based my numbers vaguely on DC's. I said, No, I think the artist is at least as important as the writer. So the original 4%, I said 1.5% for the writer, 1.5% for the penciler, and 1% for the inker. So I divided it up differently.
Mm-hmm.
And then, to his credit, my friend Barry Kaplan, who was complicating my life up a lot, he comes back to me and he said the revenues are really going incredibly well. He said, how about we do a sliding scale? I said, oh, like a regular book publisher, sure. So as your sales on your book increase, the royalties go from a 4% pool to an 8% pool. And then I added the 1% override if you create a title, and I added 1% for the editors, and some other little thing, I don't know. But so we actually had a 10% royalty pool on the top selling titles.
Mm-hmm.
And every title at Marvel, every single one sold over 100,000 copies. So every title got royalties. Now, I'll grant you, when like Kung Fu was dying, the royalties got small because as it gets down near 100,000, it wasn't that great. But the X-Men, Avengers, Spider-Man, the first few issues of Alpha Flight, which then tank went down.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I remember one time handing John Byrne, he was in the office. So I was upstairs and they said, we have a check for John Byrne. I said, fine. And so I took it downstairs. I handed it to John. I said, John, here's a royalty check for one issue of one comic book for which you've already been very well paid. You got a lot of money for drawing and writing that. Here's a royalty check, $30,000. One issue, right?
That's amazing.
And again, think how many issues he did a month. So he did fine. He did great. And almost everybody was doing very well. I mean, Walt on Thor.
Oh, yeah.
The Stern on Spider-Man and all these tremendously talented people were getting rewarded a fraction of what they should have been. And at least it was better than it used to be. I mean, when I first came in there was guys that get page rate only, no rights, no benefits. And there were some guys getting $35 a complete page. So writers were getting like in the teens, 15, mm-hmm. 16, letterers and colorists. I think colorists were getting at that time the not the best ones, but the fairly newer ones were getting like $2.25 a page. Yeah, I colored a couple of books. I had to get your check.
I mean, that's how do you live on that, right? I mean, you've got to do a lot of coloring, and even then, you could do 5 books a month, and you're still not doing really well.
Same with letters. I don't know. I can't remember exactly, but the letters rates were, but they weren't high. It was like $8 or something, 10. And also, this appalled me. They expect a letterer to create a logo that Marvel's going to trademark and it's going to live forever, and they paid the guy $22. $22,
Mm-hmm.
I said, that's not right. I said, so I can't do what is right, and I can't give the letterer a royalty, but I can pay him well. And so we're making all this money on it. So the first logo I commissioned was Orzakowski. I think it was Dazzler. It was one of the first ones I commissioned. And we paid him $1,500 for that. Okay, that wasn't enough, but it was better than
but it was better than the $20 or whatever they might have gotten on a page rate for it.
Yeah, and so we tried to make it right, make it fair. I couldn't change the work for hire; they wouldn't let me. But there's no reason it couldn't be good, fair work for hire. You do Spider-Man, it's work for hire. You don't own it. You create a new villain, you own 20% of that forever. But if you're doing Spider-Man, you have this pretty much guaranteed big fat check every month and big fat royalty check every month. And then we started Epic Comics, creator. Mm-hmm. So if you want to, try your own stuff, fine, go. We do Epic Comics, and Epic Comics paid really well. It wasn't, just like a little advance on a royalty. We actually gave a very sizable advance, and on a lot of Epic books, there were a few that did not make back their advance,
mm-hmm.
but most of them did. And so if creator wanted to swing for the fences, welcome to Epic.
So were the royalties retroactive? I mean, was Kirby able to get money from his earlier creations, or it was really from that point forward, right?
I tried.
Yeah.
All right. I really tried to make it. I knew they wouldn't let me do retroactive back to the 60s, and that wouldn't happen. What I tried to do was to get Kirby and Ditko and all the older guys included for the work they'd done, but from that point on.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, Kirby would get his 1% of the Fantastic Four. Ditko would get his 1% of Doctor Strange, even if they weren't working on it. Because
right,
and also 20% of anything that came in for characters that they had created long ago. And I'm talking about licensing revenues, things.
Yeah.
But I just couldn't win that fight. I tried and kept trying, but and I actually tried to buy Marvel once, and it was in my business plan that we were going to enact that all the way back to the date I started that program.
Mm-hmm.
If we succeeded in buying Marvel, we came in second to Ronald Perlman. My group is called Marvel Acquisition Partners, and I don't know. His was, I don't know what, some company. McAndrews and Forbes, maybe.
Okay.
Or not. Actually, it wasn't. It was something that McAndrews and Forbes owned. Doesn't matter. Who cares? But I bid $81 million, and he bid 82.5. So, and he was an insider at the selling company, so he knew what I bid. Just outbid it.
Just bid a little more.
And I was not allowed to reply. I could have gone up to about 115 million, but you know what? He would have taken it anyway. He would have spent whatever he needed. He wanted it, and sooner or later the bank would get tired of
right,
increasing my limit. Yeah, a good backer, Strankman Capital. Chase North America was my lending partner and my financial advisor.
Mm-hmm.
It was a good team, but fell short. We were the only bid. We thought we won. We had to go sign papers and stuff, but there was an out clause for them in the papers. And so when Perlman found out what our price was, he beat it, and they used their out clause, and they took the company. I mean, we were the only bid. There were nine companies that made the finals of the auction,
mm-hmm.
and 8 of them dropped out because they couldn't get management. And the reason I know that is they all called me. And so we were the only bidder. So you think we win? No.
Right. I mean, just think. I mean, if you had, I mean, you might have, squashed the, these lawsuits that we have today, from the families, looking for things. If you could have,
I would have brought them back in the fold, just like
right, exactly.
I would have said, no, you're a founding father, and we're
Mm-hmm.
going to do the best we can for you, and make things as right as we possibly can. And if it had come to pass while I was there, I knew there'd be movies. I knew there would be all that stuff as technology advanced. And if I had been there when that happened, oh yes, those people would have made lots and lots and lots of money, and been rewarded handsomely for their creations. But I wasn't there. Didn't happen. I remember when Superman came out, the first year I was editor-in-chief. And it got good reviews, and it was playing to packed houses. The only show you could get into was the first one in the morning. So I told my crew, we have to see this. This is a watershed moment. This is the beginning. This is where it's starting. And so I took 35 people with me to the movies the next morning. We all got in and said, bought everybody popcorn, bought their tickets, bought popcorn. And we watched it. I said, this is a landmark. We should see this. And so we did. And it was in a way a landmark. There were a couple lesser superhero movies after that, but then that Batman came out with Jack Nicholson in it.
Right.
$400 in its first week. Come
mm-hmm.
on. And so I said it's happening now. It's starting to happen. It's not all fully formed yet, but it's coming. And and look at it now.
Who would have ever thought? And you figure a lot of the stories that you helped, you were editor in chief on, have found their way into these movies. Yeah,
they're mining that era. I mean, it's not like I wrote everything, but I mean, I got the guys, and they did good stuff, and that's the stuff they're using mostly. Mm-hmm. And there's other stuff too, but I mean, like an awful lot of that stuff. They even used like Chris's titles for a couple of the X-Men's, right? Days of Future Past, maybe, or I don't know, but a couple of his titles,
things, yeah,
they used on the movies. I thought it was really nice, and they usually put everybody in the credits. The only person they don't put in the credits is me. They don't like me.
I don't know why, Jim.
I do. Valiant took a 17% chunk of their market share in 1 year, and they didn't like me anymore.
You made enemies right away.
Oh yeah, I managed.
You know, I hate to do this, Jim, because we're at that 55-minute mark. We're a little bit past that, actually. But the thing is, you know, I would really like to have you on one of my like 2-hour shows, or let's talk more. You know, maybe after the first of the year, I could have you come on again. I mean, there were lots of people whose comments I couldn't highlight, or a few questions came in as well. I mean, I know we'd have a very you know, energetic and energized group to chat with you again if we could do that.
Anytime, that's fun. You know, I'm sorry I talk so much.
No, no, this is great. I mean, I didn't really think, you know, I always was very curious about the royalty system and how it got put in place. So that's why I focused on that a little bit. But no, I mean, this is all enlightening. And, you know, as a business owner myself, I admire what you had to go through and how you had to dig your heels in on the things that you believed in. And I think that, you know, Marvel wouldn't be Marvel today without the effort that you put into it. And the royalties, I'm sure that it brought in better talent and made people want to work harder, and it worked.
Yeah, it did. It did. Like I said, we turned it around at the beginning just by getting the good people there, and then when they got the royalties and the benefit stuff, zoom, we took off. It was great. Good people.
Well, again, thank you for this. We'll be in touch. I'll get in touch with Ken, and we'll set up another time when we can talk. But I appreciate it, and you know, have a great rest of your day. And thank you everybody for tuning into this. There'll be another panel. This show will actually just roll right into the next show, so you can sit on your screen, and YouTube will take you to the next panel with Cliff Chang and Felix. Thanks again, Jim.